My daughter-in-law glanced at my simple dress, laughed, and said in front of everyone, "How cheap, outdated." My son stood silent. I smiled, but inside I knew. One quiet decision of mine would change everything. By the next morning, their perfect plans would begin to unravel, and before long, the law itself would step aboard that yacht. Before we begin, if you believe in the strength of dignity over revenge, remember to like, subscribe, and share what dignity means to you. I always believed a mother's love is best shown in the quiet ways, the ways that don't call attention to themselves. My son Daniel was getting married, and I wanted his day to be as bright as the Miami sun that had followed me through most of my 62 years. That's why I paid for the yacht, the fuel, the catering, the docking fees, every last bill that arrived with its numbers in neat little rows. I didn't tell him I was covering it all. I never once asked for thanks. That's not how mothers do things, at least not the way I was raised. When I signed the checks, I thought back to my years in the cockpit piloting small planes out of Opelika. In those days, my salary was decent but not extravagant. I learned early to be careful, to stretch each dollar. Flying taught me discipline, and discipline taught me freedom. I kept investing, first in small vessels, then in shipping routes. It wasn't glamorous, but it grew into something strong enough that, when my boy's wedding came around, I could give him this gift without blinking. The yacht was a beauty, white hull gleaming, 3 decks, polished railings that caught the light like jewelry. I didn't choose it to impress his fiancé's family or their friends. I chose it because my Daniel loved the ocean since he was a boy. I remember him standing at the edge of the pier when he was 6, his little sandals dangling off the planks, asking me, "Mama, where does the water end?" I didn't have an answer then, but I promised him he could go as far as his courage would take him. So now, all these years later, giving him a wedding at sea felt like keeping that promise. I stayed out of the planning. Savannah, his bride-to-be, had strong ideas, and I didn't want to crowd her. She picked the menus and the flowers, and she fussed over what shade of ivory her gown should be. I kept my opinions to myself. My job was to make sure the yacht was fueled, the kitchen stocked, the captain and crew paid. The invisible work. That's how I liked it. For the rehearsal dinner, I put on my best effort, though I'll admit I've never been one for frills. I wore a navy blue dress I'd had for years, nothing fancy, just simple and well kept. A string of pearls Daniel's father had given me one Christmas. I brushed my hair back into a neat bun and looked at myself in the mirror before leaving the apartment. At 62, I don't chase fashions anymore. My hands are lined from years at the helm, my shoulders broad from lifting more than my share of ropes and luggage. But I thought I looked dignified, presentable, like a mother proud to see her only son step into the next chapter of his life. The rehearsal was held on the yacht itself, docked and lit up against the night. I walked up the gangway with a steady heart, hearing laughter spill over the railings. Inside, the tables were set with white linens, silverware polished to a shine. Waiters floated about, offering champagne. Daniel was already there, his arm draped casually around Savannah. His face lit up when he saw me, and for a moment, I felt the same rush I had when he was little, running into my arms after school. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek, "you made it." "Of course I made it," I told him, patting his arm. "Wouldn't miss this for the world." I stayed mostly quiet that evening, taking it all in, the music, the chatter, the way the young ones posed for photos with their glasses raised. I thought of the invoices tucked neatly at home, each one stamped paid. It didn't matter that no one there knew whose checkbook had made it possible. What mattered was that Daniel was happy. That was enough for me. I found a seat near the window, watching the lights flicker across the water. My heart swelled with a quiet kind of pride, the kind you don't need to announce. My gift to my son was not just the yacht or the money. It was the silence of sacrifice, the knowledge that he could stand tall before his guests without worrying how it all came together. I thought back to my own wedding decades earlier. It had been nothing like this. Just a small church hall, a borrowed dress, ham sandwiches served on paper plates. His father and I didn't have much, but we had love and determination. And now here I was, making sure my boy had more than we ever did. Isn't that what every parent hopes for? I left the rehearsal that night with my shoulders light. I felt I had done right by him. I had given all I could. Not for applause, not for recognition, but for love. As I walked down the pier toward my car, the salt air brushing against my face, I whispered to myself, "This is his beginning, Lydia. Your work is done." I didn't know, not yet, how quickly joy can sour. But in that moment, I was simply a mother, proud of her gift, proud of her son, proud to stand quietly in the background while his life bloomed before him. Rehearsals are supposed to be gentle affairs. A practice run, a chance to laugh over mistakes and imagine the beauty of what's to come. That's what I told myself as I walked along the pier to the yacht the next day, the evening breeze carrying the salty smell of Biscayne Bay. Inside, the space was half-lit. No grand decorations yet, just tables set with bare linens and a few vases of flowers Savannah had picked, just for the trial run. The captain stood at ease near the bridge, and the catering crew shuffled in and out, setting down trays for later. Guests weren't invited. It was family, the wedding party, and a handful of planners bustling about with clipboards. I felt comfortable in that setting. Not overlooked, not competing with gowns and jewels. Just me in my navy dress, my pearls, and the shoes I've always called my good pair. Though they've been with me 20 years. I thought it would be enough. Daniel was already there, talking with the officiant about where to stand. He turned and waved at me. His smile the same one he'd had as a boy when I came to school plays. That warmed me. For a moment everything felt right. Then Savannah swept in. She carried herself like a movie star walking into a premiere, though it was just a rehearsal with 20 or so people. Her bridesmaids trailed behind her, giggling over something on a phone. Savannah wore a sleek ivory dress, not her wedding gown but close enough, silk that caught the low light and made her shimmer. Her earrings sparkled like tiny suns. I rose to greet her, smiling warmly. "You look beautiful, dear," I said. She paused, gave me a glance up and down, and then, oh how I'll never forget her tone. She tilted her head and said, "Oh, you wore that." The words alone weren't cruel, but the way she lingered on them, dragging them out in front of everyone, made my stomach tighten. A couple of bridesmaids stifled laughs. Even the planner at the corner raised her eyebrows before looking quickly away. I stood still, smoothing the skirt of my dress, not quite sure how to respond. "It's just a simple thing," I managed softly. Savannah's lips curled in that half-smile people wear when they're pretending to be sweet. "Simple, yes. Outdated, too. But I suppose it's you." She turned to the others. "Isn't it adorable? Lydia always keeps things traditional." Laughter bubbled around the room, small and uneasy, like people weren't sure if it was safe to laugh. My cheeks burned. I looked at Daniel, praying he'd step in, just a word of kindness. But my son said nothing. He gave a weak smile, rubbed the back of his neck, and let the moment pass. That silence, heavier than her words, settled deep in my chest. Savannah moved on quickly, chattering about flower arrangements and instructing the bridesmaids where to stand. She didn't look back at me again. But I stayed frozen in that moment, hearing the echo of her mockery. "You see, sweetheart, I'm not a woman who needs compliments. I've lived too many years, seen too many storms, to be undone by one silly remark about clothes. But this wasn't about a dress. It was about respect. About a place at my son's side that I had thought was mine by right of love and sacrifice." I watched them practice their vows, her hand tucked neatly in his arm. She looked radiant, confident, utterly in command of the evening. He looked happy, so happy. I tried to hold on to that. Tried to tell myself if she loves him, that is enough. But every so often, I'd catch the glance of another bridesmaid, still smirking at my expense, and my throat would tighten again. At the close of the rehearsal, everyone clapped as if it had been a performance. Savannah hugged her friends, laughed loud and bright, posed for a few snapshots with her father. I stayed near the window, looking out at the harbor lights. Daniel finally came over, kissed my cheek and said, "Thanks for coming, Mom. It means a lot." I smiled. "Of course, darling." But inside I thought, does it? Does it really? Because when I needed him to stand up, he hadn't. He had chosen silence. And that silence, I realized, told me everything I needed to know. I walked off that yacht with steady steps, my heart heavy but my mind sharpening. I wasn't angry yet, not in the wild way of youth. At 62, anger doesn't rise hot and quick. It settles slow, cold, deliberate. That night, as the wind tugged at my hair and the water lapped against the dock, I made a decision. I would not shout. I would not plead. I would not make a fool of myself by demanding respect where it was not given. No, I would act. And my action would be quiet, almost invisible, just like the gift I had given. That night after the rehearsal, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my little apartment overlooking the marina, listening to the hum of boat engines settling into the dark. Miami nights are never quiet, not really. You always hear the muffled bass of music from a bar down the street, or the faint roar of a plane circling toward the airport. But inside it was still. Too still. I replayed Savannah's words over and over, the way she'd lingered on that when she looked at my dress. And worse, the way my son had said nothing. That silence had curled itself around my heart like a cold rope. I wasn't raised to make a fuss. My mother always said, "Lydia, dignity isn't about what they hand you. It's about what you keep for yourself." So I didn't cry. I didn't call Daniel to demand an apology. I didn't draft sharp words to Savannah, though heaven knows a few sat bitter on my tongue. Instead, I made a cup of tea. Chamomile. No sugar. I sat at my kitchen table, steam rising against the dim light, and I thought about everything I had done for that wedding. The invoices were stacked neatly in my desk drawer. Fuel, catering, docking fees, all in my name, all settled from my accounts. I thought of the calls I'd made to the marina, the favors I'd pulled from men I'd known since my flying days who now ran logistics down by the pier. Every piece of that wedding was resting quietly on my shoulders. And yet I had been treated like baggage. I finished my tea, washed the cup, dried it, and set it back on the shelf. Then I reached for the phone. Not many people in this city remember me as a pilot anymore, but the marina world is small. My voice still carried some weight in the right circles. I called Arturo first, the dockmaster. "Arturo," I said, keeping my tone light. "About that mooring for Saturday, cancel it. The yacht won't be needing it under my account." He was quiet for a beat. "You sure, Lydia? It's booked solid this month." "I'm sure." Then I called the catering company. "Yes, it's Lydia Novak. I'll need to cancel that order." No replacement. Just take it off." "Thank you." Finally, the fuel company. That one stung a little because I knew the captain personally. But I wasn't about to keep paying for people who mocked me. "No delivery," I told them. "Not on my tab." When I hung up, I sat for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. My heart was steady, my breathing calm. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was simply refusing to fund contempt. They thought I was invisible, but they were about to learn what happens when the invisible hands step away. I didn't write Daniel a note. I didn't warn him. My love for him is unconditional. But love doesn't mean you let yourself be trampled. Sometimes love is letting a lesson unfold. I slipped on my cardigan, the navy one with the loose button at the cuff, and stepped out onto my balcony. The marina lights glittered across the water, reflections dancing like tiny fires. I could see the outline of the yacht where the rehearsal had been held, resting quiet against the dock, its white hull glowing faintly. For a moment I whispered into the night, I gave you everything I could, my boy. Now you'll see what it means when that gift is gone. The next morning, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. I walked to the corner bakery, bought myself a small cafecito and a guava pastry. I read the paper on a bench near the water. I nodded to the fishermen setting out with their rods. Inside, though, I felt lighter than I had in days. Not happy, no, happiness was far away just then, but lighter. I had taken back my dignity without a single raised word. That evening, I ironed my dress, folded it carefully, and hung it in the closet. It wasn't shame. I'd wear it again for church or bridge. No, it was a simple ritual, a closing of one chapter. I didn't tell anyone what I had done. Not Daniel, not the neighbors, not even my bridge partners. I carried it in silence, the way a captain carries the weight of her vessel. You don't announce every course correction. You just steer. When I lay down that night, the sound of the waves rocked me into sleep. For the first time in weeks, I didn't dream of flowers or vows or Savannah's shrill laughter. I dreamed of open skies, the kind I used to fly in, where the horizon was mine and mine alone. And in that dream I remembered something my old flight instructor once told me when I was barely 20. Novak, if you don't like the air, change your altitude. That's what I had done. Quietly, with steady hands, I had changed my altitude. The morning of the wedding was hot. The kind of Miami heat that settles into your skin before you've even had your coffee. I dressed slowly, carefully. Not in silk or sequins like Savannah's people would, but in a light linen dress, soft cream, with my mother's brooch pinned at the collar. I told myself it was enough. It had to be. I walked to the marina early, as I always do. Years of flying and sailing taught me the value of being on time, better yet, ahead of time. The yacht gleamed in the sun, white hull dazzling against the turquoise water. Guests were already gathering on the pier, women in hats and dresses that shimmered, men in suits too heavy for the weather. I took my place at the edge of the crowd, content to observe. The trouble began almost immediately. A deckhand rushed down the gangway, his face flushed. I recognized him, Miguel, a good kid I'd seen around the docks. He spoke quickly to the captain, who frowned, then checked his watch. Within minutes, whispers spread. The fuel truck hadn't arrived. I sipped from the bottle of water I'd tucked in my bag. The knowledge sat heavy in me. Of course the fuel hadn't arrived. I canceled it. Soon after, another problem surfaced. The catering vans, parked neatly outside the marina gates, weren't being allowed in. I could hear the raised voices from where I stood. No authorization, no entry, the guard repeated firmly, shaking his head. The poor young waiters looked bewildered, trays of untouched food waiting in the back of the trucks. Guests began shifting uncomfortably. A woman beside me muttered, "Strange, isn't it? For such a grand wedding, nothing seems ready." Another guest leaned toward his companion and whispered, "Didn't the mother pay for everything? Why is it falling apart?" I kept my eyes on the water. Then Savannah arrived, stepping out of a sleek car, her bridesmaids tumbling after her. Her gown glittered like sunlight on glass, her hair pinned high, jewels flashing at her ears. She looked every inch the star of the day, sweeping forward with a practiced smile. But that smile faltered the moment the captain approached. I couldn't hear every word, but the tone carried. Sharp, clipped, urgent. Savannah's face shifted from confusion to fury. Her father joined in, waving his hands, his voice booming loud enough for all to hear. "This is unacceptable. We'll settle it now. Just bill me directly." The captain shook his head, pointing to the paperwork. Guests, waiting under the unforgiving sun, leaned closer, straining to catch pieces of the argument. Whispers swelled into ripples of gossip. I stood quietly, my hands folded in front of me, my brooch glinting faintly in the sun. I wasn't gloating. No, sweetheart, that's not in me. But I watched, steady and calm, as the truth of how fragile their little empire really was began to show. Savannah turned then, her eyes finding Daniel. Even from across the pier I could read her lips. Do something. But my son, my poor boy, looked lost. His tie was crooked, sweat beading on his brow. He tried to soothe her, to speak to the captain, but his words held no authority. He had grown up under my wing, always cushioned, always cared for. He'd never had to stand against a storm alone. Now, with the world watching, he wilted. Why didn't you check with her? Savannah hissed, loud enough for those around me to hear. Your mother was supposed to handle this. Wasn't she? And just like that, the whispers turned toward me. Head swiveled, eyes flickered my way. I kept my face calm, expression neutral, though my heart pounded steady in my chest. A woman in a pale blue hat leaned toward her friend. But if the mother paid, why would she pull it back? Their words floated like sea foam, scattering in the wind. Savannah, realizing her slip, lifted her chin and turned back to the captain. But the damage was done. Her wealthy friends, the people she wanted most to impress, had seen her lose her footing. Embarrassment spread across her perfect face like a crack in fine porcelain. I stayed where I was, silent. Not triumphing, not pitying. Just watching. You see, humiliation has a peculiar sound. It isn't loud. It's quiet. It's in the rustle of programs in restless hands, in the coughs and sighs of guests checking their watches, in the way conversations turn into murmurs just out of earshot of the bride. I knew the day would continue. Money would be thrown around, calls made, documents hurriedly signed. But once whispers begin, they don't stop. And Savannah's glittering surface had just been scratched deep enough for everyone to see it. I folded my hands tighter, my nails pressing into my palms. My son hadn't defended me at the rehearsal, and now he stood mute again, letting her rage consume him. Pain me, oh it pained me. But I also knew, this was only the beginning. The embarrassment was immediate, yes. But underneath it, darker currents swirled. I could feel it in my bones, the way old sailors feel storms before they break. And I knew this. My quiet withdrawal had opened a door. What walked through next would not be embarrassment alone, but revelation. Once the first wave of embarrassment passed, fuel missing, catering stalled, dock clearance revoked. The wedding should have collapsed right there on the pier. But Savannah was not the kind of woman to accept defeat, especially not in front of her friends. Her father stormed back from the marina office, his face red, his tie loosened. It's handled, he barked, loud enough for all of us to hear. Just a clerical mistake. We'll get this yacht moving. A few guests clapped politely, eager to believe him. The bridesmaids cheered as if the problem were solved, brushing the dust from their dresses and adjusting their makeup. Savannah lifted her chin again, her confidence restored in a mask of icy composure. But I knew better. I had spent decades in the world of ships and harbors, contracts and port authorities. Paperwork doesn't tangle by accident. Fuel, catering, docking, those are 3 separate lines of service. If all 3 fail at once, it isn't coincidence. It's a crack in the foundation. Still, money can buy a lot of plaster. Within an hour, replacement trucks were summoned. Boxes of food began rolling across the gangway, crew rushing to load champagne and shellfish as if nothing had happened. A fuel truck finally arrived, hose snaking toward the yacht's belly. The captain gave curt orders, face tight, clearly annoyed at the disarray. By noon the guests were boarding. Women held parasols against the sun, men adjusted sunglasses, and Savannah swept up the gangway in her gown, triumphant once more. Daniel followed, pale but smiling faintly, as though he believed everything had smoothed over. I stepped aboard with the others, my sandals clicking softly on the deck. I kept to the edges, unnoticed, a shadow among sequins. From the top rail, Miami glittered in the distance, the skyline sharp against the blue sky. The engines rumbled to life, low and steady. But peace didn't last. Not half an hour after we slipped from the marina, a sharp whistle cut across the waves. I turned, my heart tightening. On the horizon, a white vessel approached, fast and purposeful. The flag snapped in the wind. United States Coast Guard. At first, guests clapped, thinking it part of the show. Someone laughed. Look, they're giving us an escort. But the crew knew better. I saw it in the captain's face, the way he stiffened, barking orders into his radio. Within minutes, the Coast Guard vessel drew alongside. Officers in crisp uniforms standing at the bow. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Vessel C whisper, prepare to be boarded for inspection. The laughter on deck faltered. Glasses of champagne lowered. Savannah's smile froze in place. What is this? She demanded, clutching her father's arm. Why are they here? This is my wedding. Her father puffed up, his chest heaving. They don't have the right. We're in international waters. But we weren't, not yet. And anyone who knew the sea as I did could tell. The Coast Guard boarded swiftly, their boots striking the deck in unison. They carried clipboards and tablets, polite but firm. Routine inspection, one officer announced. We've received reports of duplicate invoices and irregular documentation tied to this vessel. We'll need to review the papers. Guests whispered nervously. Some pulled out their phones, only to realize there was no signal this far out. Savannah's bridesmaids huddled together, eyes darting. I stayed by the rail, quiet, steady. I had seen inspections before. They always revealed more than people wanted. The captain produced a thick folder of documents, but the officer flipped through them with a frown. These insurance forms are inconsistent. 2 different policies listed. And these signatures, sir, did you authorize these yourself? Her father blustered, waving his hands. Of course I did. Must be some clerical mistake. We're respectable people. This is my daughter's wedding. The officer didn't flinch. Sir, irregularities in maritime documentation are a federal matter. We'll need to verify everything. The mood on deck shifted. The champagne no longer sparkled. The music faded into nervous silence. Guests glanced at each other, unease spreading like spilled ink. I pressed my hands together, feeling the steady hum of the engines beneath my feet. This was no accident. The web Savannah and her family had spun was starting to unravel, thread by thread. I caught Daniel's face across the deck. He looked bewildered, pale as parchment, standing frozen between his bride and the officers. He hadn't expected this. My sweet boy never had the head for details, never cared to look at the fine print. But the fine print was roaring at him now, louder than vows or music. Savannah clutched his arm tightly, nails digging into his sleeve. I could hear her hiss, "Fix this, Daniel. Fix it now." But there was nothing he could do. The Coast Guard spread across the yacht, checking compartments, photographing documents. One officer paused near the catering crates, flipping through invoices. Another scrolled through a tablet, murmuring into his radio. I felt my heart beat slow and steady. I wasn't smiling, not gloating, but I knew what was coming. When you live your life on the water, you learn this. Storms don't always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they come with paperwork, signatures, and the quiet click of handcuffs. As the Coast Guard questioned her father, Savannah's voice rose higher and sharper. This is a wedding, not a crime scene. Do you know who I am? But titles mean nothing at sea. Out here it's truth that floats or sinks. I stayed silent, a grandmother in the corner, my brooch catching the sunlight. No one asked me anything yet. But soon, I thought, soon they will. And when that time comes, I will not be silent. For now, I simply watched the waves roll, calm and endless, as trouble gathered on the deck of the yacht like storm clouds heavy with rain. I stayed near the rail, silent but alert. My years at sea and in the air had trained me to notice patterns others overlooked. And I noticed something then. One of the officers was frowning at a line of numbers on his tablet, tapping the screen like he couldn't quite make sense of it. so I stepped closer. "Excuse me, son," I said softly, touching his arm. He looked startled, probably wondering why a grandmother in a linen dress was bothering him in the middle of an inspection. But I smiled gently. "May I?" He hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. It was a record of payments, digital transfers in long strings of letters and numbers. To most eyes meaningless, but to me they looked familiar. When I retired from flying, I invested in shipping. That meant learning how freight companies were paid, and in recent years that included dealing with cryptocurrency. I'd studied enough of it to understand the basics: wallets, transfers, test accounts. And what I saw on his screen made my stomach tighten. "Those aren't catering payments," I murmured. "They're test wallets. Look here, this same code repeats. That means money's being washed. Passed through again and again to look clean." The officer blinked at me, surprised. "How do you know that?" I gave a small shrug. 40 years navigating storms, son. You learn to read the water. And this is a storm. He leaned in, suddenly attentive. "Can you point it out?" I nodded, tracing the repeating sequence of numbers. "That wallet there, it's not real. It's a marker. Whoever's moving this money is laundering it through sham payments. And look, see this one? That's the same wallet that was used to pay for today's catering and fuel." The officer's eyes widened. He turned to his partner, murmuring quickly, showing him the screen. Within moments, the mood shifted again. Radios crackled. More officers converged, flipping through papers with fresh urgency. Savannah noticed the change and snapped. "What now? What are you looking at?" Her father blustered. "This is absurd. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's just some old woman." The officer straightened. "Ma'am, this woman just identified a suspicious wallet linked to today's expenses. That gives us probable cause to expand the investigation." All eyes turned to me then, Savannah's sharp and venomous, Daniel's wide and confused. For the first time, I let them see the steel in me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point fingers. I simply said, "Numbers don't lie." Daniel's lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but Savannah cut him off, hissing, "Don't listen to her. She's trying to ruin us." But it wasn't me who was ruining them. It was their own greed, their own lies unraveling under the weight of truth. The officers worked faster now, tracing the payments back, cross-checking invoices with the marina. One called out, "Duplicate insurance policies, issued within days of each other." Another shouted, "Suspicious transfers flagged in the last 30 days." The deck buzzed with tension. Guests huddled in corners, whispering. Some looked ready to call for their drivers, though the sea stretched wide around us. I stayed steady, hands folded at my waist, my brooch glinting in the sun. I had spent years being overlooked, dismissed as simple. Now my knowledge, my old instincts honed from years of charts and ledgers, was exposing the truth. One officer came back to me, tablet in hand. "Ma'am, could you help us mark the suspicious flows?" I nodded, taking the stylus, circling the repeating codes. "That's your pattern. It loops through these 3 wallets, then lands here. Whoever set this up thought no one would notice. But once you tag it, you can trace every cent." He smiled, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You've just saved us hours." Savannah's voice rang out, shrill as a gull's cry. "You can't take her word. She's bitter, jealous. This is slander." But her words sounded hollow now. The tide had turned. Daniel looked at me then, truly looked like he was seeing me for the first time in years. His eyes held confusion, hurt, maybe even shame. But he said nothing. That silence still stung, though now it cut him too. I turned back to the rail, watching the horizon. The sea stretched wide and endless, calm above, turmoil below. I thought of all the storms I had weathered, in the air and on the water, and how every storm taught the same lesson. Truth will surface no matter how deep you try to bury it. And so it was here. The Coast Guard had their lead now. The money trail was clear. And the wedding, meant to be a glittering showcase, was turning step by step into a crime scene. I stood quietly, a grandmother with silver hair and a steady gaze, and whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. This is only the beginning." Storms don't always roar in with thunder. Sometimes they come in waves, small at first, then crashing harder and harder until the whole ship lists under their weight. That's how the investigation unfolded on that yacht. Once the Coast Guard tagged the suspicious wallets, their questions sharpened. Officers moved with new purpose, radios buzzing, eyes scanning every line of paperwork. What began as a routine inspection had turned into something much bigger. I stayed by the rail, steady watching. Years of navigating cargo contracts had taught me one thing. If there's one fraud, there are always more. And sure enough, the sea began to cough them up. The first came in the form of a fuel invoice. An officer flipped it open and frowned, then came directly to me. "Ma'am, is this your company?" he asked, pointing to the letterhead. My heart gave a small jolt. There, bold at the top, was the name of the shipping firm I had once helped run, retired now, sold in part, but still carrying my reputation. And there, scribbled beneath, a signature that was supposed to be mine. But it wasn't. I didn't need more than a glance to know. The loop on the N was wrong, the slant of the K uneven. Whoever had forged it thought they could mimic my hand, but they hadn't studied me long enough. "That's not my signature," I said quietly. The officer nodded. "This invoice claims your company was billed $38,000 for today's fuel. Filed last week." I looked out over the water, breathing slow. 38,000. More than enough to sink a small firm if left unpaid. My name had been dragged into their schemes without a word. Savannah's father blustered immediately. "Nonsense. A simple mix-up." But the officer was already turning away, calling for verification. Fraud, plain and simple. Not long after, a broker who'd arranged some of the wedding charters stepped forward. He carried a small black tablet. "I don't want trouble," he said nervously, "but I've got proof this signature was faked." He tapped the screen and a video appeared, grainy footage from his office camera. It showed a man, one of Savannah's associates, leaning over his desk, pen scratching across paper. The broker's voice on the video. "You're sure she signed this?" The man's reply, flat and quick. "Don't worry, no one checks." Gasps rose around the deck. Even the bridesmaids stopped their whispering, their painted faces pale. And then came the final wave. The marina guard himself boarded, still in his sun-faded polo shirt, holding a small recorder in his hand. He looked uncomfortable but determined. "I think you'll want to hear this," he told the officers. The tape crackled, and then Savannah's voice filled the air. Clear as a bell, haughty and certain. "After the papers are signed, he'll hand over the keys to the trust." A hush fell over the deck. You could feel the shift like the moment before a squall breaks open. Daniel's head jerked toward her. "Savannah, what is that?" Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then spat out. "That was taken out of context. It's nothing, just a private joke." But no one believed her. Not after everything else that had surfaced. I closed my eyes for a moment, my hand resting on the rail. That one sentence confirmed what I had suspected all along. Savannah hadn't married my son for love. She hadn't planned this yacht for joy. She was angling for his inheritance, for the trust one had set aside for him. The thought cut me deeply, though I didn't let it show. Guests shifted uneasily, some backing toward the gangway as if distance could shield them from the scandal. Officers took notes, their faces set in grim lines. Savannah's father raged, shaking his fist, but his words rang hollow now. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale, lips trembling. His silence at the rehearsal had wounded me. But this silence, it was different. He wasn't complicit anymore. He was waking up. Finally seeing the woman beside him for who she truly was. And me? I stayed steady. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse. The truth was spilling out without my help. All I had to do was stand there, quiet and firm as it unfolded. Storms, I thought, have a way of revealing what the sea has been hiding all along. And this storm had only just begun. If the morning had been a string of cracks, by afternoon the whole dam burst. The Coast Guard had already uncovered the forged invoices, the suspicious wallets, the recording of Savannah's voice. Each piece was damning on its own, but together they painted a picture too clear to ignore. The officers' voices grew sharper, their radios busier, and then, quietly, without fuss, they called in backup. I felt it before I saw it. A hush over the water, the way gulls rose suddenly into the air. And then they came. 2 more Coast Guard cutters glided in from opposite horizons, flanking us like wolves circling prey. Guests gasped, clutched each other, whispered frantically. Some reached for phones, forgetting there was no signal this far out. Savannah's father shouted, "This is outrageous. You can't do this at a wedding." His voice cracked like an old sail in a storm. But the law doesn't pause for flowers or champagne. A sharp whistle blew. Ropes were tossed. Within minutes, more officers swarmed aboard. This time not just Coast Guard, but men in darker jackets, the kind that carry federal seals on their sleeves. They moved with precision, no hesitation. "Ladies and gentlemen," one officer announced, his voice calm but firm. "This vessel is now under federal investigation. Please remain calm and follow instructions." The deck erupted. Guests screamed, their voices high and panicked, the sound of fine shoes clattering against the wood as they scrambled. A bridesmaid fainted outright, caught by another in a glittering gown. The string quartet, bless them, had been playing softly in the corner. They dropped their bows in shock, one violin clattering to the floor. And still Savannah tried to command the scene. She stood on the steps of the upper deck, her gown glowing in the sun, her face tight with fury. "This is my wedding," she shrieked. "You can't ruin it. Do you know who I am?" But her words were swallowed by the chaos around her. Officers moved briskly through the crowd, securing documents, sealing boxes of catering supplies, even confiscating champagne bottles to test for fraud in supply chains. Guests were corralled toward one side of the deck, murmuring like cattle at market. Her father fared worse. 2 agents stepped forward, asking him for identification. He puffed up, waving his wallet like a weapon. "I'll have your jobs for this," he thundered. But when they pressed him with pointed questions, about duplicate insurance policies, about money transfers through crypto wallets, his bluster faltered. His answers tangled, contradicting themselves. Finally, they slipped a pair of cuffs from a pouch. The click of metal around his wrists was louder than any bell that day. Gasps echoed across the deck. Savannah froze, her mouth opening in silent horror as her father was led aside, flanked by 2 agents. Her composure shattered like glass. She stumbled down the steps, reaching for Daniel, her jeweled fingers clawing at his sleeve. "Do something," she begged. "Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them we didn't mean." But Daniel stood still, pale, trembling. His eyes weren't on her anymore. They were on me. I met his gaze across the chaos. My face was calm, unreadable, but my heart ached for him. This wasn't how I wanted him to learn. But sometimes sons can't hear wisdom until the noise around them breaks apart. The music was gone, the laughter silenced. All that remained was the hum of engines, the steady bark of orders, and the sobbing of guests whose finery now felt like costumes in a cruel play. An officer passed me, his arms full of documents. He paused, tipping his cap slightly. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "thank you for your help earlier. You saw what we needed to see." I nodded once. No pride, no gloating, just acknowledgement. The truth had surfaced, and that was enough. As the agents continued their raid, The sun began to dip lower, gilding the chaos in a false beauty. Bridesmaids clutched each other, mascara running. Guests huddled in corners whispering about scandals, about headlines sure to come. And in the middle of it all, Savannah stood shaking, her father restrained, her wedding unraveling thread by thread. I rested my hands on the rail, feeling the steady sea beneath us. The storm had broken, fierce and unrelenting. But storms, I knew, are cleansing things. They strip away the false, leaving only what's real. And on that deck, with society watching in horror, the truth was bare for all to see. By the time the Coast Guard had finished their first sweep, the yacht no longer looked like a place of celebration. It looked like a crime scene. The white linens hung limp, champagne flutes stood abandoned, and guests huddled together in tight knots, whispering with wide, frightened eyes. Savannah's father was already in custody, his wrists cuffed, his protests growing hoarse. The agents were careful but firm, their faces unreadable. They weren't here for spectacle, they were here for truth. Savannah herself was unraveling. Her gown shimmered in the late sun, but her face was blotched with panic, her hair falling loose from its perfect pins. She clutched Daniel's arm so tightly I could see her knuckles whiten. "You believe me, don't you?" she hissed. "Tell them it's all lies. Tell them." Daniel stood frozen, pale as sea foam. He looked from her face to the officers, to the scattered documents, to the guests who no longer looked impressed but scandalized. His lips parted, but no words came. One officer stepped forward with a small recorder, the one brought by the Marina Guard. He played it again, clear and cold in the salty air. "After the papers are signed, he'll hand over the keys to the trust." Gasps rippled across the deck. Daniel flinched as though struck. "Savannah," he whispered, his voice breaking. "What did you mean by that?" She shook her head violently. "It was nothing. A joke." "It didn't sound like a joke," he said. His voice rose for the first time, raw and wounded. "It sounded like you were planning to strip me of everything." Savannah tried to laugh, a brittle sound that carried no weight. "Don't be ridiculous. You know I love you. This is just your mother." She turned sharply toward me, her eyes blazing with venom. "This is her doing. She's always hated me, she set this up, she—" But her words faltered when she saw my face. I didn't glare at her. I didn't argue. I simply stood there, hands folded neatly, my brooch catching the dying light. Quiet. Steady. And it was that silence, I think, that broke her more than any accusation could have. Daniel's eyes followed hers, landing on me. For the first time truly seeing me. Not as the quiet mother who had written checks, not as the background figure at his side, but as someone who had tried in every way to protect him, even from himself. His shoulders slumped. He pulled his arm free from Savannah's grip. "No," he said softly, then louder, firmer. "No, I can't do this." The words fell heavy, final, like an anchor dropped to the sea floor. Savannah stared at him, stunned. You can't mean that. You can't leave me. Not now. Not here." But he was already stepping back, shaking his head. His voice trembled, but it carried. "I should have listened sooner. I should have defended my mother when you mocked her. I should have seen what you were after. But I see it now." Her face twisted, desperate, then furious. She lunged toward him, nails flashing, but an officer gently intercepted her, guiding her aside. Her protests rose into shrieks, echoing across the waves. The guests were silent, watching it all unfold. High society, yes, but not immune to the lure of scandal. Already I could see the gleam in their eyes, the stories they would tell at dinners, the whispers that would spread by morning. Daniel turned back toward me, his face stricken. For a moment he looked like a boy again, the same boy who once clutched my hand after a fall, eyes searching for comfort. But now there was no comfort I could give. Only truth. I gave him a small nod. Nothing more. No embrace, no words of "I told you so." Just a nod, steady and quiet, as if to say, "Now you know. Now you see." The agents moved swiftly after that, securing documents, escorting Savannah's father into one cutter and marking Savannah herself for questioning. Her sobs and curses echoed long after she was led away, her voice ragged and desperate. Daniel stood apart from it all, shoulders slumped, face pale. He didn't follow her. He didn't protest. He simply stared at the horizon, as though seeing for the first time how far he had drifted from the shore of who he once was. I turned back to the water. The waves glimmered in the fading light, steady, indifferent. Storms pass, but the sea remains. And so it was here. The storm had broken open everything false, leaving only what was true. I felt no triumph, only sorrow and a strange kind of relief. The engagement was over, shattered in full view of the world. The love my son thought he had was nothing more than a mirage. Painful, yes, but better to learn the truth now than years later, when the cost might have been far greater. And me? I stood quietly watching from the shore of my own heart. I had loved, I had given, I had been humiliated. But in the end, truth had spoken louder than cruelty. Sometimes, sweetheart, that's all a mother can hope for. When the storm was over and the agents had taken their leave, I walked home alone along the harbor. The air smelled of salt and diesel, the way it always does after a long day at sea. My heart was heavy but not broken. Daniel came to me later, pale and quiet. He tried to speak, but I held up my hand. "No, son. There's nothing you need to explain. You've seen what needed to be seen." He bowed his head, tears glistening, and for the first time in years, I felt him leaning on me again. Not for money or favors, but for strength. In the weeks that followed, the scandal grew, investigations deepened, and Savannah's name became a cautionary whisper. But I didn't feed on it. Revenge was never my aim. Instead, I sold off part of my shipping assets, the ones I no longer needed. With that money, I established scholarships for maritime navigation, small, steady gifts to young men and women who dreamed of the sea but lacked the means. Quietly, without fanfare, just as I had always given. The papers called me dignified, resilient. But I wasn't chasing headlines. I was simply doing what a mother and a sailor knows best, turning pain into ballast so the ship sails steadier. On quiet evenings now, I sit on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the horizon fade into the night. The gulls wheel overhead, the water hums against the pier, and I think of the generations yet to come, charting their own courses, learning to read the stars. That, I've come to realize, is the truest gift I can give. Strength born of silence. Dignity carried forward. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.